In your opinion, how long does it take to get to the point before this war started?
I don't think we'll ever get to the point where this before this war started. The world's changed. Before this war started, Russia was talking to NATO to create a new European security framework. After this war finishes, Russia will have defeated NATO, um, and won't be inclined to give NATO the same consideration that it gave to NATO prior to this war. The same with the United States. Um, I think we're looking at a completely new European Russian relationship, one that where Europe has to respect the strength of Russia. Back in December of 2021, Europe ignored the Russian outreach for a new European security framework because they didn't respect Russia. They didn't fear Russia. They viewed Russia as a joke, a nation, a gas station disguised as a nation, things of this nature. Well, Russia has emerged from this conflict, you know, having defined itself as not just a regional powerhouse, but a global powerhouse with unmatched military skills and an economy that's booming compared to Europe's economy. Russia's not going to give away everything that it has accrued in a positive fashion over the course of the past 2 years um, just to have good relations with Europe. I think that Europe is going to have to redefine its relationship with Russia based upon respect of Russia and a respect of Russia's sovereignty and a respect for Russian national security prerogatives when it comes to spheres of influence in Europe.
I talked with Professor Richard Wolff and Michael Hodson. They were talking about the reason behind this war in Ukraine was the reason that the West had against Soviet Union. They wrecked the economy of Soviet Union by forcing them, by convincing them to put a lot of money in their military industrial complex. So the economy of Soviet Union collapsed. But they were not successful in this policy in Ukraine, and Russia could manage the military part and the economy. You've been in Russia recently. How did you find this?
Well, I'm not an economist and I don't want to play one, so I have to be careful about getting too far outside of my lane. What I can say is this though: the Soviet Union suffered from you centralized planning. Um, if we take a look at their ballistic missile production, they produced very good missiles and they produced a lot of missiles, but the mechanism was of pain. The economy of producing missiles wasn't something that the West could readily comprehend. Um, it wasn't that the factory received money for the missile. Like if I contract with Boeing to produce a missile, we have a price marked for each missile, and that price generates funding that then gets budgeted and used to pay salaries, build infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. That's not how it worked. Um, for there was there's a whole bunch of factors that went in that didn't have direct economic correlations, and so it was unsustainable, especially when the Soviet economy tried to transition away from centralized planning into the more cost effective cost accounting where they had to account for each dollar where to go to traditional Western style accounting. And what they found when they made that transition is um, you couldn't sustain for instance, the factory city. One of the things about the Soviet Union is when they produced these missiles in Vodkinsk, where I was, um, the factory was responsible for schooling, for the roads, for housing, for social things. So the budget that they received from the state didn't just pay for the missiles; they paid for everything. When you went over to cost accounting, um, suddenly you're paying for a missile, but there's no money for everything else. So the system started to collapse. So it wasn't that the West caused Russia to collapse. That's just not true. The Soviet Union could very well, if I mean, there's a school of thought today that that the reason why the Soviet Union collapsed is because Mikhail Gorbachev precipitously transitioned from Soviet-style economy to a Western-style economy with no plan on how to do it, and and the whole thing collapsed. Had he continued the Soviet-style planning, but sought to tighten it up, make things better, make not make a direct model of a Western capitalism, um, there wouldn't have been this precipitous collapse. But he didn't have that vision. He had bought into the notion that the West was better. And next thing you know, you have Boris Yeltsin, the decade of the 90s, and the absolute devastation of Russia because of this. If you take a look at Russian capitalism today, it's a totally different concept, but it's not American capitalism. It's something different. The Russians have a unique um, economy today. But what's interesting is the West has no clue how the Russian economy works. Just like we had no clue how the Soviet economy works. I'm just being straight up honest. The CIA had no clue how the Soviet economy worked. They were just guessing. This is why people like Jeffrey Sachs, who went into Russia in the 1990s, couldn't grasp, what he was trying to fix because he was coming in with a Western economic planning model that did not translate into the reality of Russia. Russia has emerged from the 1990s. They had to deal with some new artificialities, the rise of an oligarch class that didn't exist during Soviet times had to be factored in. Um, but the saving grace here is that when the West sanctioned Russia in 2022, it was a full divorce, and it forced Russia to do things that politically would have been very difficult to do, like untangle the West from Russian economy, to shut down the oligarchs, to insist on the reinvestment of money in Russia. Um, the West doesn't know Russia's economy today. I mean, I keep telling people that you need to go to the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum every year so you get an understanding of what makes the Russian economy tick. Nobody wants to go because that's Russian propaganda. No, it's Russian reality. There was an exhibition, I think it's still on for a couple more weeks, the VDH exhibition in Moscow, that talks about the economic status of all the various districts and republics and oblasts. Each one had their own exhibition platform. And I toured that, and you get to see the diversity of the Russian economy. Again, if you don't see it, you don't know it, you can't talk about it, you can't assess it. Um, and I think that I think we put too much. We've created a myth about the collapse of the Soviet economy. It didn't collapse the way they say it did. I would challenge them on that. I think that it's far more complicated than just saying that we put so much pressure on them in terms of producing weapons that the system collapsed. No, the system was there. It was working. It wasn't firing on all cylinders. The problem was trying to transition that system to Western style capitalism. That's where the collapse took place, not because we put too much pressure on on Russia. And today, the notion that we could pressure Russia. How do you pressure a system that you don't understand? I mean, what points of pressure are you going to push? It makes no sense. We're going to sanction the Russian economy. One of the reasons why sanctions have failed is because they don't know what they're doing. They don't know the Russian economy. They don't know how it functions. They have artificial expectations about, if we cause effect relations, if we do this, this will happen. Well, we did this, that didn't happen, but it backfired on us. I would say that most economists today don't have a clue what the reality of the Russian economy is. I don't have a complete picture of it, but my host that takes me to Russia is a Russian economist. And he spent a lot of time introducing me to the reality of the Russian economy, not just in Moscow, St. Petersburg, but throughout in Novosibirsk, in Irkutsk, Ekaterinburg, Izhevsk, Kazan. And you see the reality, the complexity, the diversity of this Russian economy. You know, there are weaknesses, there are strengths, but my point is we in the West don't understand it because we've divorced ourselves from Russia. We study Russia from afar through a filter that's defined by Western academics who are inherently opposed to Russia, therefore paint everything that happens in Russia in a negative light.